Today.
Good morning to you, thank you.
And sitting alongside Edward is Mr. David Tunnicliffe. David is the Commercial Director at GL Events, who play a massive part in the delivery of the infrastructure at the Ryder Cup and have done for several years now. David, welcome along to the podcast.
Good morning.
So we're going to be talking today about, as I said, the infrastructure. Edward Kitson, as I said, is the match director for the Ryder Cup. And I suppose the best place to start with that whole conversation, Edward, is what does being match director involve? What would be a day-to-day example of what you get up to in the planning and the delivery of the tournament?
Very simply, it's everything what happens outside the ropes during the week of the Ryder Cup. So myself and the team are responsible for the whole operational delivery of the Ryder Cup. So from how a spectator actually gets to the Ryder Cup, the experience during the day, whether they bought hospitality, whether they are watching the golf, for the first aid, the catering, all the layout of all the structures, the grandstands on the site, the big screens. And it takes an awful lot of planning over many years to create the Ryder Cup. And we started back in 2012 working with the French Golf Federation, who were the hosts to the Ryder Cup, and we started looking at the whole golf course and how we could improve the golf course to deliver a really massive and successful Ryder Cup.
And when you say improve the golf course, in your particular role, we're not presumably talking about the actual quality of the greens or the fairways. As you said, it's everything outside of those ropes that mark where the audience, the crowds stop and the actual play begins. You're talking about everything that goes off, outside of that.
That's correct. I have a colleague who's responsible for the setup of the golf course inside the ropes. As I say, my role is really everything outside the ropes. But we work very closely with the French Golf Federation, who actually shut the golf course down for 1 year and did some massive changes. They put in totally new drainage, new irrigation. They did some general tweaks to the golf course. But the view, because we played a number of French Opens already at the Golf National, that the golf course was a good enough test. But how could we actually just tinker with it to make the whole spectator experience better? Because that's something we're always striving to do. And one of the issues was it had some wonderful banks all the way around the Golf National, but actually it was covered in gorse and broom and bush. So we worked with them and cleared a lot of that out so that these natural amphitheatres were created, particularly around the last 4 holes, which created a massive excitement.
And of course, having a great golf course on which to play is one thing, but having a great golf course and having a great venue that you can actually bring in hundreds of thousands of people and facilitate all the hospitality that presumably has to go along, the logistics of vehicles coming on and off site. The great golf course is one thing, but actually being able to deliver everything else that you need is another thing. How long is the vetting process to actually sort of select the right course for any given Ryder Cup tournament, and how was Le Golf National decided upon?
There was 6 countries that actually bid for the 2018 Ryder Cup, and this goes back to the process started in 2009, and the venue was selected in 2011. The actual, a lot of detail goes into that, as I say, into the golf course, but also very much into how we will get the spectators there to the site. And it's obviously so crucial to any event organiser is to make the first part of any spectator experience is getting to the venue, and their last memory is actually leaving the venue. So we work very closely with all the authorities in France in how we could create a successful transport plan. And we wanted to use, because they want to have a good environmental legacy to the event, and so we used two sort of train hubs to bring in over 50% of the public spectators actually came by train, which is the first time we've ever achieved that at a Ryder Cup. So this was very much part and parcel of the plan, but also we worked on any road improvements and looking at areas where we could do off-site parking, which didn't impact too much the residents locally. And one of the other big challenges we had was that the Renault have their European base, which is almost adjacent to the Golf National. So we worked very closely with them as to the way that they very kindly, during the week of the Ryder Cup, they had flexi hours for their workers on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then they actually closed the whole of the Renault Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we had also that as contingency parking. So again, it's very much a relationship working with the community, working with the authorities, and also working with the government, who were very supportive to it.
And on the subject of road improvements, it's a nice point to bring David into the conversation. David, GL Events, the role that you've got there, I guess that the first question I ask is, what exactly do you supply there, or what don't you supply? Maybe
well, not road improvements.
Yeah.
So we, for the Ryder Cup specifically, we provide the temporary structures, which would be, in layman's terms, marquees. They're not marquees. These are triple-decker, 3-storey structures. Some of them are 2-storey, some of them are very large. The retail area is sort of 50, 60 metres by 40, 50 metres. It's a very big space. We're not talking about small marquees. In addition to that, we supply sometimes we supply the internal fit-out elements of it, or work with other suppliers that Ryder Cup would put forward to work with on our structures for heating, power distribution, lighting. So I would say we provide the nuts and bolts. We're one of the suppliers that provides the nuts and bolts, to be clear.
And my link with the whole road improvement side of things is presumably, Edward, when you're looking at procuring suppliers and when you're looking at the infrastructure that you would ideally like to put in for a tournament of the scale of the Ryder Cup, you've got to look at things like not just the road improvements to getting the spectators on and off during the actual tournament days itself, but for suppliers like David to bring on all of their vehicles, you have to look at the access and how you're going to actually deliver that infrastructure build, which presumably takes weeks, if not months, in the run-up to it.
Absolutely. With the federation who own the Golf National, when they submitted their bid, they put forward their ideas of how they thought the site would work. Obviously, we looked at that. We discussed together how we could actually improve that, and a number of the areas that GL did beautifully for them. It was the first time actually in France 3-tier structures were ever built on a golf course, and we looked at we created 3 platforms when the course was shut to actually house these GL structures, which was had wonderful views over a number of the holes. It was something very unique that we've actually done for the first time in France. And also the other big focus we had was around the first tee experience, and something that we've grown with each Ryder Cup. The whole first tee experience is one of the things that the spectators want to be there for that first shot on Friday morning at 10 to 8 in the morning. I mean, we had queues at 5:30 in the morning in the bus terminals of people coming in, and this comes back to the whole transport planning. But this was the biggest ever first tee experience we built with GL events. And it's one of the unique factors that in Paris was the first tee experience. 7,500 seats around the first tee.
And when it comes to actually designing a structure like that, David, how difficult is it to do that? Because you will have such high demand from Edward, presuming his team, for how many people can actually be in and around something like the first tee. How do you go about designing a structure like that?
It's a long process, because you've got to think of the sightlines, the audience, the structure integrity of what you're building, where just the camera angles that's going to be used. The players need to have an input about, they don't want to be disturbed too much, but the atmosphere around the first hole was absolutely spectacular this year, and that was achieved by building almost a horseshoe of seats round the first hole, then continued round to the end of the 18th from memory. So it was almost an S shape of seats. And we did some very strange things. We went to before the event even started, we went to a cricket ground. We put a golf ball in the middle of the cricket ground, and we took a photograph from how far you would be away on the top of the seat to see how the audience would see that golf ball. So we really look into the sight lines. So we take into consideration sight lines first, safety first, obviously, the sight lines, how the guests are going to get in and out of that many seats, because you've got 7,000 people trying to get on off a stand. You need to consider how they're going to get on and off safely.
Absolutely. And you're also working with a lot of different, I suppose, stakeholders, if you can call it that, because you mentioned sight lines, not just for the spectators, but you've got hundreds, thousands of TV cameras, press photographers there who all need access. And how much manipulation has to go into the infrastructure once it's actually been built? How much contingency is allowed, so that if you get on site and actually there's a conversation with a TV director where you might have to move something around, are you able to do that?
I would say with Edward's team that's quite rare, because they plan ahead with the TV, with the media buyer. They plan ahead with catering. They plan ahead. So by the time we get to site, we've pretty much got a full set of 3D working drawings. There's always going to be tweaks on site. There's always going to be something that's in the wrong side of line. But they're generally, because we've got this understanding between supplier and customer, that we both have got a common goal to deliver something. So with the Ryder Cup specifically, we don't tend to have those last minute changes that we would with other projects, because we have this. We've done 4 Ryder Cups over 12 years, or 3 Ryder Cups over 12 years, so we kind of know what Edward's team expects, and we know what media partners want, and we know where the air conditioning is going to come in. We know where we've got an understanding, and we can, sometimes Edward will say stuff, or Edward's team will say things to us, and we'll say, that's not a bad idea, but have you thought of this? Because actually we know that a particular product might work better a different way. So it's very much a collaborative approach to avoiding those problems before we get there.
Sure. The structures at tournaments like the Ryder Cup now become a very much an iconic part of a tournament. When you look back in the archives, with so many photographs and so much media now available for people to actually see visually what happened there, do you feel the pressure from tournament to tournament collectively or individually to improve upon what you did at the previous tournament?
You have to improve. You have to always think about your guests, the guests that are coming. I mean, we're here to specifically play Ryder Cup, but other major events would have a different guest expectation.
Mm-hmm.
We hope GL knows what the Ryder Cup guest wants. So we work with the Ryder Cup team to create that experience. So the challenge isn't in necessarily, firstly, delivering something new for the sake of it. It's ticking the first box. Is it comfy? Will it keep them dry? Will it keep them warm or cool? You know, can they get to a toilet? We look at the very practical sides of things first. You've got to get that right first, and then we can start making it a bit more interesting, perhaps adding different concepts to it, looking at different simpler things as colours, or how people get in, or cladding, or branding, or immersive experiences when you get in the structure. So, but the first thing we have to do as a temporary structure company is the seat comfortable? Can they get in the seat? You know, can they get in the lift? Can disabled people get in and out of the structure? So it's very much practical side of things first, and then we add the dressing secondly, which that's fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, I think all events is about collaboration, and we always work closely with all our suppliers. The European Tour Ryder Cup is very loyal to companies that work well for us, and if they deliver a good job, we like to reward them and work with them again. They recognise that what we're trying to achieve is a premium product, and that is what we're always aspiring to as Ryder Cup, is the highest and the premium, and that is what the spectator and the guests and our partners and sponsors are experience. We, through the sort of process of doing the sort of site overlay, it's very much a collaboration. When we obviously mapped out what we want in our minds, what we want to do on site as far as the structures, we sat down with GL and other suppliers and said, look, this is where we see the hospitality is going. This is what we want to achieve. Go away and see what you feel will be the best structure to fit in that area. And then, you know, we had 3 companies tendering for different areas, and then we came down to select 2 companies that we felt that actually delivered the best product for us on site. And particularly on the grandstand, it was again a very interesting experience, this first T grandstand, because when we probably had about 10 different drafts before we got to the final one. It was actually slightly larger at the time. It got to over 10,000 seats, but when we actually got to it, and as David alluded to earlier, they put a golf ball down, and when we had 10,000, it was so far away, and it was actually over 28 metres high.
Wow. And
the general feeling was that the actual spectator, because it's not like being in a stadium where you've got a walling around it. You were going to be out in the open, and it was a sort of general feeling, gosh, this would be the highest, although we wanted it to be as high, this would actually, some people might get spooked by the height.
Sure.
So we decided actually to slightly lower it down, because also we wanted to put some hospitality boxes on the back. It's again a new innovation that we did at the Ryder Cup, and I think again that came down to working together. It wasn't just about GL seeing this as an opportunity to put as many seats in as possible. They gave us advice. Look, think about this. This could be a challenge. How the amount of staircases it's going to be for the person getting up to the top.
Yeah.
How are we going to service those hospitality units at the top, bringing the water, the food, and everything up? It was going to be a major logistical challenge. So as I say, we widened it, but we reduced the height slightly.
Going back to something you mentioned a little while ago about improvements that the course had actually made over the course of a year, to drainage, cutting back of certain bits of gorse to open up some of these amphitheatre areas. David, were the structures designed based on the changes that were going to be made, or were the changes that were made to the course done so in order to facilitate the types of structure that you wanted to put in, or was it a combination of both?
I think the latter of the two. I mean, a temporary structure in its nature is it's a Locarno kit. It joins together. So there is you're working on specific square meterage kind of limitations. Mm-hmm. So, and that's from not just GL, but from most temporary structure suppliers. So Edward's guys know this. They know already what sort of structure dimensions are playable. So I'm sure when Edward's looking at Italy next year, in their mind they're going to say, well, we can fit a 20 metre, 50 metre, 30 metre structure there. When it comes to the seating, there's slightly more flexibility, I would say.
Yeah.
But no, I would think that Edward's team knew an idea of the footprint, and that's what was done on ground.
Again, just touching on something that you mentioned from an accessibility point of view, how many stairs people would need to climb, etc., etc. You will have one eye on guests with physical disabilities and creating accessibility for disabled spectators. How sophisticated were the structures in terms of what you're able to put? Were you able to put in lifts or disabled
absolutely.
lifts and things like
I think
that?
it's fair to say that anybody who wasn't as able as others could have seen most of the course, I think.
Wow.
10 days before the Ryder Cup, and this is a nuance in working in France, they had a delegation of over 30 people who came around and went around every structure. And with that, there was someone in a wheelchair who came and to see whether he could get to everywhere on the site.
Yeah.
And we had to conform to that and make sure that there was an ability for someone in a wheelchair to access every element of the site. So whether it's around the golf course, inside a GL structure, most of them all had lifts, but if they didn't, we had to have these staircase systems that would enable a disabled person to get up. So it was something we'd never faced before, and again, that came down to the whole health and safety of an event, and we obviously do want to conform to every measure.
Absolutely. Just looking at GL's HQ, David. Am I right in saying that the HQ is in France?
Yeah. Headquarters in Lyon. Yeah.
Okay. It's from an actual hardware point of view. How much was sourced from the base in France? How much came over from the UK? And what were the logistics like in getting the sheer volume of hardware there that was required?
It was probably 50-50, I would think. I mean, I don't know exactly, but we did ship quite a bit of stuff in the UK, mainly because the structures that we use for the Ryder Cup aren't used so much in the rest of Europe. Edward said earlier that the triple-decker, the multi-deck structure, it was the first time that's been built on a golf course in France. In fact, I think it's only the second one ever been built in France. So there's not the call in France to hold that kit, whereas in the UK, we do use that kit a lot.
Right.
It's used at Ascot, it's used last week at Cheltenham, it's used all over the place. So that a lot of the multi-deck stuff is kept here. Some of the more simple structures, where it was just generally more economical and commercially favourable to do that, came from France.
Okay.
But most of the more intricate stuff came from the UK.
In the planning stages, Edward, and in the build-up, David just referenced Cheltenham and Ascot. Were you able to actually go out and see some of the GL structures in situ at other sporting events and look at how they were being deployed?
Yeah, I think as an event organiser, it's always important to attend other sporting events, and it's something that I personally and all the team try and attend, because you get ideas, you learn and gain, and obviously, looking at whether it's a tented structure or the way they're decked out internally, it all gives you inspiration to always improve, and as I say, that's what we aspire to do, to always get to be a leader, certainly in event delivery.
We went over to America, I think two of our colleagues went over to America 2 years ago. So we go and look at other Ryder Cups to see what's happening over there, what's fashionable. And with horses, I went over to Melbourne this year to the Gold Cup with two of my biggest clients in the UK. And it's just about exactly that. You get some inspiration, you see how someone else is doing it, wrong or rightly, and you add all that together into a pot, and that's how you come up with the answer.
And I guess when you consider the fact that if you compare it in golfing terms, the Masters every year is always at Augusta. So they have the same course every year, so they can look at the same venue every year to look at how they can tweak it and improve it. The difficulty of the Ryder Cup, of course, is that it's bouncing backwards and forwards across the Atlantic, but then when it does come back over to Europe and it falls back onto you to arrange, you're working in a new environment. Maybe not every time, it will repeat certain courses, but you're essentially starting with a blank canvas in some respects.
Absolutely, and you can say that's the last time that the Ryder Cup was at the same venue was at 2002 at the Belfry, and since then we've been at a different venue ever since. As an organiser, you can say, gosh, it'd be much easier to return to the same one, but actually it gives you that extra dimension and excitement that you're going to a new venue, you're creating new relationships, you've got new challenges, and that's what I enjoy about my job. It's certainly not repetitive anyway, and I love, and all the team do, love the opportunity of going to different parts of the world. We're about to head to Rome for the first time in 2022,
course, yeah.
And we've got to understand the culture and the way that how a spectator, how a sponsor, how a guest in hospitality, we can't just dish out what the standard fare is that happens in the UK. We've got to look, and so over the next year I'm attending a number of different sporting events in Italy to really understand how they entertain their guests. So
I was going to say exactly the same. We actually like the challenge of going somewhere new. I think anyone who gets into the event industry, that's part of the excitement, is to create a space, whether it be a temporary theatre space, a sporting venue, a classroom. I think people in the industry generally, it's thriving to have that challenge. That's what we like about our industry. So going to each, the fact that it's at a different site in Europe every 4 years, actually, it's a bonus. It's not a negative, I think. It's more work, but
And when did that planning start? I figure it's going to be a long time, but are you able to do much of what you will need to do in Italy prior to last year's tournament, or is it pretty much a case of get the tournament out of the way and then start to look at what you may be doing?
Yeah, I mean, in Italy it's slightly different. We're actually totally rebuilding the golf course, so that has started last year, and within the whole master planning, we've looked at areas of obviously where the tented village will go, the spectator village, where the hospitality units are going, where the guests are going to come in, and so we're working very much with the course designer on the site overlay, and obviously at the moment I'm over there regularly trying to checking, because obviously you have to tweak things as you go along, but the principle is it's going to be a totally new golf course that has been built for 2022, and that's added a new dimension. We did, in going back to 2010, there was 10 new holes built for Celtic Manor when we took the Ryder Cup to there.
Right.
But really, since then, most of the venues that we've been going to have only been really tweaking the actual venues in a number of the holes. We did some at the Belfry it was done in 2002, but the Brabazon course was very much the same as it always was. So this is again a new dimension and challenge, and as soon as the course is finished, we will start working on the actual site overlay in detail.
Right.
But our focus is very much on getting the golf course built, the planning of where we're starting to put the fibre in for the connectivity, obviously water, drainage, and working detail on the whole transport plan, because obviously that's critical to the whole spectators.
David, how often do you and your team get to meet with the other suppliers that will be involved? Because as Edward has just alluded to, that there are things like connectivity, infrastructure, cabling, power, all of those other elements that have to come together to deliver the whole event. How often in the run up to such a big event as the Ryder Cup do you get to meet with the other suppliers and be able to sort of sit around a table and plan what you're all going to do, how it's all going to work together?
I think Edward pointed out earlier that the Ryder Cup generally are quite loyal. If you're a supplier to the Ryder Cup, you tend to be with the Ryder Cup for quite a while. So we work with the suppliers that on the Ryder Cup on other projects. Mm-hmm. So we see them all the time, and we often talk about Ryder Cup in a non-structured way outside of the event. I mean, I would say that probably 3 years before the European Ryder Cup, Edward's team's got an idea of what they want. That's got a commercial aspect which needs to be addressed 2.5, 3 years out. And by the time we're probably 2 years out, we've pretty much thereabouts or ish been appointed. So once we're appointed, yes, we've got a level of infrastructure that we would talk to, heating, lighting, carpets, internal fit out people, but all those people we know quite well. I mean, they're our friends, some of them, and we work with them on other events through the UK. There are structured supply meetings that Ryder Cup put together, but actually it's a bigger picture than that. We're constantly looking with the Ryder Cup, along with some of those real high level projects. We're always talking to each other about those projects and what went wrong or what went right, how we can improve, how we can interact better, whether the seating could have toilets wedged underneath them so we took less footprint.
Sure.
This year the Ryder Cup put hospitality inside the seating stands, and that worked really, really well. So those conversations happen all the time. It's not a sit around 50 people around a table. You do get that, but I would suggest that a lot of the work goes on over conversations on other projects.
So is that reassuring for you as match director and as an event organiser, Edward, to know that actually, in that run up, in that long run up into each tournament, that you have got suppliers like David who are talking to your other suppliers, and that those conversations are happening?
Absolutely. I mean, when we appoint the suppliers, we want everyone to work together, and we do hold, probably quarterly, and from 2 years out of the key suppliers who are appointed, it's really the tentage, the interiors, the power, the air conditioning are the key ones to bring together. When actually something we introduced for the first time in France this year was actually every day we had a structured half an hour meeting of all the key suppliers on site. So they came in and held by our ops team and gave everyone opportunities to raise any concerns, but also for us to be monitoring the schedule, because it was very key. We had to be finished in time because of this health and safety visit that we had, because they wouldn't accept if we hadn't finished a ramp or something.
Sure.
So we're working to a very detailed and timeline program that we had to get all the suppliers to buy into, and they knew that, and it was very clear from the start. But as events everyone has to work together, and that's what we try and create, that sort of collaborative approach. We do things like we have barbecues during the, in the run up to the event to try and get everyone to have a bit of time together. So we appreciate it's all, everyone's working long hours, but occasionally we try and do these things to try and create the right environment for everyone to get on.
I was going to ask about the adaptability of some of the structures in there, David. Again, I would guess that every day you've got different corporate sponsors, different levels of hospitality during the actual live days of the tournament and during the practice days as well. Is there any adaptability built into the structures? Once they're up, they pretty much stay like that?
For Ryder Cup, I don't think there is. I mean, it can be done, absolutely. It's not difficult at all. But the way that I think the hospitality packages are sold in the Ryder Cup, you have a package which you are tied into for the duration of the cup, so we don't need that flexibility. In fact, what it does do is means you can spend slightly more of the budget on creating a more bespoke environment for that particular guest. So actually it's a benefit they have that, because it becomes their space. So I can't remember all the sponsors we have, but some of the sponsors lounges at Ryder Cup are absolutely stunning. The internal fit out is beautiful.
And is there much, we're just referencing back to Rome and in Italy in a few years' time, will you look to actually tailor the decor and the insides of that based on the location that you're at? When you're in France, you want that sort of Parisian flavour to come through in the structures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously within the interiors and looks of the structures, but it's the critical element is the food, the catering, and the theme and the flavours of the food was very Parisian. And the same, obviously, we know that one of the passions of the Italians is Italian food. Not this is pizza or pasta, but it's we've got to ensure that the flavours are respected, because that's what people expect. So,
excellent. We're rushing and hurtling towards the end of today's episode. It's one of those episodes that I love because I feel like that there's so much that we could talk about, and perhaps further down the line as things progress, maybe it's something that we revisit on a regular basis. Maybe once a year we can get together in a room and find out how things are progressing, because it's been great. On today's podcast, we've been talking to Edward Kitson. Edward is the Ryder Cup match director, and David Tunnicliffe. David is the commercial director at GL Event, talking about their involvement in the Ryder Cup. The 42nd Ryder Cup matches were held in France between the 28th and 30th of September 2018. A huge undertaking, and if you've ever watched a Ryder Cup, seen pictures of it, watched it on television, it's mammoth. And as we've alluded to in today's episode of the podcast, the structures are very much an integral part of the tournament. They become iconic, they become part of it. And when you look back in those photos in years to come, that's what you'll see. Guys, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. Thanks once again to our hosts. Today we've set up the podcast studio remotely. Not something we've done in a couple of years. They all tend to be recorded now via laptops and internet connections, but I'm delighted that today we're at the London home of Crucial Effects and their brand new Origin experience. If you want to find them on Twitter, at Origin_London is the Twitter handle. Thank you very much to the guys from Crucial Effects for hosting the podcast and allowing us to set up the studio today. And we will see you on the next edition of the Event Industry News Podcast. Thanks very much and goodbye.